Welcome, all pregnant families, midwives or birth workers. This is Tracy Anderson Askew, your host for the Transform Your Birth podcast, changing your mind about birth one story at a time. Each week we will be exploring a birth story through the lens of what birth can teach us. I'll be digging deep into each story so you can learn what it is that can change the way a birth unfolds. We can't control birth, but we can influence it. So listen in to find out how. Enjoy. Today we have a special guest who is a midwife, lactation consultant, and leads a practice of independent midwives working in the community called Evolve Midwifery Services. Anne sees breastfeeding as not just a physical challenge to be overcome, but involves our emotional and mental well-being. Anne covers topics like how do you know if it's not working, expressing during pregnancy, and the role of the partner in successful breastfeeding. This is a great episode to prepare you for breastfeeding and understanding the tricky landscape of feeding a newborn baby. Sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Before we begin, a note from our sponsor. This episode has been brought to you by Transform Parenting, an organisation that provides courses, coaching and community from pregnancy through to the first 7 years of a child's life. Most of the stories you will hear through this podcast are graduates of the Transform Your Birth workshop held in Canberra. Our Transform Your Birth Today course is now available to anyone, anywhere, at any time, and includes all the wonderful wisdom of this course and live weekly catch-ups when you need it with our host, Tracy. For a little taste, please accept our pregnancy gift offer, which contains free the first few lessons and some essential wisdom for pregnancy. The link can be found in these show notes or visit transformyourbirth.com.au. And now for the episode.
Welcome, everybody. Once again, we have the Transform Your Birth podcast, and this is a wonderful episode because I've got a dear friend of mine on today. Her name is Endres from Evolve Midwifery, and she is a breastfeeding legend. She works with a lot of complex breastfeeding issues, and I send a lot of my families to her, and she is very persistent and doesn't give up in terms of finding the way forward for people. And one of the biggest challenges that you're likely to have once you've had the baby is conflicting advice around breastfeeding. So welcome, Anne. Thank you for coming on.
Hello, everyone. I'm very excited and very humbled being with you guys today. So thank you, Tracy, for having me. It's an amazing opportunity. Thank you so much.
Now, Anne, for my pregnant families, what do you think they need to know about breastfeeding prior to when baby lands? What are some of the important things they should know about?
I think that with breastfeeding, there's possibly three things that we don't talk enough about. So number one would be expectations, number two, education, and number three would be excitement. So the three E's, if we may say so. If we went into the first one in regards to expectations, I would say that there is a plethora of information out there about pregnancy. There is a lot of information out there about childbirth education, ideal birth planning or kind of preferences for birth. But I would say a lot of the families who are support and struggle, they actually mention over and over again that they have underestimated how much it can be challenging or how much it can take to actually get breastfeeding right, and that they wish they would have spent a lot more time on education. And so often what comes out of that is that the expectations are a bit, I would say, not ideal, so that it's a lot, if we have a really good pregnancy and we have a really good birth, whichever way birth evolves, that then often people think, well, breastfeeding is natural and I should just be able to do that.
So I do hear, though, and from women when they talk about the idea of breastfeeding in their pregnancy, they often use language like, I'm going to try and breastfeed. And I always find that an interesting word, try, particularly as a woman who knows and understands the mind and how the mind and our body responds to the words and images we give it. Now, if you're sitting in the middle of a country where there's no other options, you're going to do more than try. You're going to absolutely do your best to make it work. So what do you find with women's confidence going in? And is that something that is a bit of an issue, do you think?
I think that the idea of saying "I'll try" gives essentially a way out not to feel disappointed when it doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
So if we actually look at why women do that, it's possibly not. It's not always a negative in that, it's kind of trying to come from a point to say, look, I try, but if it really doesn't work, I don't want to kind of feel bad, because it will be a time in a woman's life that is very well, changing, a lot of things that are changing. You would know how a mother is born, and I would say with every child another facet of a mother is born. But then also it's possibly that trying not to get hopes up, because they might have heard from other women how challenging it has been. They might also have reservations and feel under pressure that they should actually give it a go, even if they might have had, let's say, they might have reservations whether they actually wanted to breastfeed, and they feel a lot of social pressure that they think this is what they should do. Obviously, most hospitals have baby-friendly health initiative, where we kind of really try to kind of encourage women to breastfeed. And it's despite the point of what we think is right or wrong, but I would say it's a lot of women also feel that pressure on them, and so I would say, yeah, there is definitely a certain level of anxiety involved and a lot of pressure involved for women, why they say I try rather than say I commit, I will make it work,
Yeah. So that's around expectations. And I think sometimes we can go in with the expectation that it should just be natural and it should be easy, but that's not what often happens, is it? Tell me about that.
Yeah. I think in a world where more women will experience a certain level of intervention, and obviously when the women experience intervention and the babies experience intervention, so we have actually this situation where a baby is born at term, there was no induction, women have been healthy in their pregnancies, the birth goes, very smooth, then the baby is born and has undisturbed skin to skin straight after birth. All of that is beautiful and it's amazing, and we should protect that, but it isn't the reality for everyone. And so I would say that we see more and more babies that have possibly issues to, for example, to latch, or they might have issues with oral function, which is not always a tongue tie or any sort of tie or restrictions. It can be tension. So it's kind of a bit like a pie chart. If you imagine that, I call it the breastfeeding universe being a pie, and I say for breastfeeding to go around, more or less we have the situation that mum needs to be well and has enough milk, and there's a lot of conditions there. The hormones should work, but then we have on the baby side also that the baby has good drive to latch. So for example, if you had a preterm baby or a baby that's gone through a lot of intervention in birth, mum had strong medication, or the baby was born, for example, with a forceps delivery, you can imagine some babies are born, they're quite tired after that experience, so their drive to naturally want to feed is not always as strong. Or then the time pressures in the hospital system, for example, you might find that the process after birth, to have a mum and a baby undisturbed for a long time for various reasons can sometimes be interrupted in a way. And so you might find that there is not always that capacity to kind of allow mum and baby to be not separated. So there's so many facets in that. And when we actually look at that, our expectations, not just from the mums, but also from providers, are sometimes a bit unrealistic, I would say, so that we kind of, I always feel we need to meet what's actually happening out there rather than going by ideal world scenario, and then the disappointment is already programmed.
So what you're saying there is intervention can have a big impact on the process of latching and establishing breastfeeding.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that intervention is not needed, right? So I'm saying there is intervention that can be very needed, but I'm also saying
it can have a flow-on effect.
Yeah, 100%. And I would say we kind of essentially, when we look at the situation and why women sometimes struggle, there's so many layers to it. So how they are emotionally, physically, how the support is, how the circumstances are. And then obviously on the baby side, what they've gone through, what kind of experience they had, how many weeks they're born, if they had other issues like, let's say, mum's had gestational diabetes and the baby had low sugars. There's so many layers coming into that, that as much as I would hope that everyone has a very uninterrupted chance to birth their babies, to carry their babies, I should say, actually, to birth their babies, to have that golden hour. But I would say sometimes we have to kind of make parents more aware that with these situations, how they are, that they kind of have to learn to work with that, what actually has presented. And on the other hand, also, I think expectations for me include that sometimes parents possibly don't have all the education they need, and have a lot of education that can be also fostered by seeking outside authorities. So you might find being on social media or, in a world where everything seems to be so readily available, and I have talked a lot about that, there's a lot of comparing going on, or even comments like, is your baby a good baby, a not good baby? I'm like, well, they're all just babies, and I think a lot in that is it can be quite liberating once women actually try to go with the flow and learn what their babies bring, and also allow themselves to be, and not always searching for that outside authority, really.
I like how you've talked about it being layered.
Mm.
So I think we tend to focus on the physical. What's the physical problem here? What's wrong with mum's milk supply? What's the physical problem of the baby's latch? But I think you're right. I think that emotional, psychosocial aspect of what we bring in is really important. And one of the things I think your practice does really well is having time to just be with those mothers and not be, flitting in and out. It's that constant support, rather than, what a lot of people experience in postnatal wards, if they're able to stay more than 24 hours, is different people coming in, having different ideas around breastfeeding. But having somebody who gets to know you, who develops a relationship with you in order to look at, what could be going on emotionally for that mother, how supportive is her partner, what sort of preparation have they had, and to delve into those deeper layers, because it's all connected, people. Your mind and your body is all part of the one system of unit. And when
100%.
it comes to doing something like breastfeeding, which is such a huge thing for your body to do and for your baby to adapt, then there's a lot to it. So what sort of education then do you think they need?
I think, again, some women are quite prepared to go with the flow, and I don't want to say that that's wrong. Absolutely not. And you would have that in childbirth education as well, that just women, they're quite trusting and quite happy to surrender. But as particularly anxiety, depression is quite high, sometimes parents can benefit from actually getting a bit of a concept how breastfeeding works. So in my classes, I think for me it's super important to kind of be practical. So we talk about, how does breastfeeding work? What are the foundations for it to work? What if it actually doesn't work? How do you even know it doesn't work? And that's possibly the most surprising one for most parents, that they actually, once they understand the concept, I find that so many of the ripple effects are actually recognized much earlier. So we often don't see the big problems because parents are very much into it. They're like, oh, remember you said, in the class, you said we should do and watch for this and this. And it's not necessarily always groundbreaking new stuff, right? It's sometimes about just understanding. And I would say, for you as a parent, if you're out there, it's about understanding what makes you feel safer. So if you are a parent who feels you kind of thrive on knowing more, then that is great. And obviously, absolutely support that. But if you are a parent who says it makes me nervous, then I would say possibly talk to a provider who you trust, and then try to really narrow down what are the main concepts you should still know. In regards to that, I would say, education for me, the biggest one is often that women say, I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't have the words to describe what it was. And that's, for example, I have sometimes families coming in who had a not positive experience with breastfeeding with their first or even several children before, and then it's about them really finding a bit of validation for the story before, and also kind of saying, oh, now it makes more sense. And I had that I have one woman in my mind, and she had her first baby a couple of years ago, and she essentially birthed the baby early, then didn't develop a really good supply, and obviously there was a lot of grieving because she wanted to desperately breastfeed, but she simply didn't feel she had the tools, whether knowledge, whether support, all of those tools are important. And coming to the classes, I think one thing that happened that was possibly one of the most important things was really that she said, I actually know now what happened and where things kind of got off the rail a bit. And she said that is actually really good to know, because she held this belief that she was not able to breastfeed. And really shifting that by actually, and it, again, in her case, it was so many layers to the story. It was about, for example, the information wasn't ideal. The way she started to kind of try to encourage her supply when the baby was early wasn't ideal. And then kind of also very conflicting advice that wasn't ideal. And the circumstances were not ideal. So there were many layers. And so I think when we look at that, it's rarely just the one thing, right? It's several things coming together, and that can then shift how things are evolving, really.
Yeah.
It's pretty powerful, actually.
I can see your job is a bit like putting the pieces of the puzzle together, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's never the same for every woman, and it's
No.
like that in birth too.
I would actually say a lot of women, I'm always amazed by the level of education and intelligence in families nowadays. I mean, they're already done, you would know that, they're already done the Google, and then like, yeah, I read about that and I read about that. But the problem is filtering out what is high quality information and low quality information. That's the problem in a society of information overload. And that's possibly where you, as well as myself, we come into the game, is to kind of really, I usually call it turning off the noise. I find it's so much noise, it's so much information, so many things that they think they should do, and expectations that they look already amazing and rested and fabulous on day 2 after birth. And I'm actually quite concerned when I get when I visit families at home, and I don't want to say any of the mums out there who does manage to put the lippy on and get all dressed up. I don't want to judge on that either, but I'm always a bit like, how can you achieve that? How did that happen? And I would obviously not judge, but I'm truly intrigued. And then I'm like, what's happening here? How do you actually do that? And it's fascinating. I would say it's definitely fascinating, So a really big one. And obviously not to forget that, possibly a very important one, actually, to be honest, to talk about, is that not all aspects of being pregnant, birthing your baby, feeding your baby, whichever way you intend, are glorious or easy or enjoyable. You can love your baby, and you can still say at 2 a.m. when the baby's crying, holy ... how did you get in this situation?
You want me to fill in the gap for you, Anne?
Oh, you're good at swearing. I'm not.
I'm good at swearing.
Yeah, you're very good. No, you're very good at bringing it to the point. I would possibly not, but it's really it is okay. So if you have nipple damage and it's painful, of course, if you're then already watching the clock and think, oh my goodness, the baby's nearly due to feed again, be real. That's okay to feel like that. But I would say also, don't forget to see the things that are beautiful. So it can be this crazy canvas of emotions and experience of early parenting. And that's the canvas you remember,
Yeah. So a lot of people Google, and a lot of we're very much in the expert-driven society these days, although the word expert would have to be used loosely in some cases, I'm sure. What do you think people need to be aware of when it comes to taking in too much information around breastfeeding? What things could really get in the way of that?
I think priorities, first of all. Being really honest to oneself, what the priorities are. So I would say, I mean, it's pretty easy, accessible knowledge that we say, you know, in the first 6 to 8 weeks, you try to establish your supply. You know, you might try to figure out early parenting. You're trying to discover the layers of what it means to be a mum in those early days, really. And for the dads, the same, you know. Also being aware that, you know, I see a lot of families with very, very complex health issues. You know, they have sometimes gone through years of fertility treatment, and that they bring this big journey where everything has been measured, you know, everything, like every ovulation has been measured, the sperm count has been measured, their pregnancies have been measured, their bloods have been measured, their ultrasounds have been done. Then they might have had a induced birth, or they may choose a Caesar, or whatever the outcome is, but there is so much measuring. They're in hospital, their blood pressure is measured, their blood loss is measured, the baby's weight is measured. Like, you get the point. There's so much measuring. And I would say, you know, in that world, sometimes we have to just kind of be real with parents, you know, that they're not just, so I say to a lot of moms, actually, you're not just a boob and a baby. You bring an entire journey with you. And my first advice, and the most important advice, in my opinion, is to really get real about what your needs are, what are you prepared to actually invest, and what's your priority, and what would a good outcome look like, really. And that is very personal, very individual. You know, and then we can work with that. And of course, there's an ideal scenario where I would hope that mums can breastfeed as long as it's good for them and it's good for the babies. Well, for babies, you could feed a long time, but most importantly is kind of starting with that, because if you haven't figured out how important it is to you to breastfeed, it's really wobbly fundamentals, you know, really wobbly foundation for a potential challenging situation.
Yeah. Now, and women in their pregnancies get told to express prior to the birth. Tell us about that. Is it a good idea? And if it is, how do you do it?
I think so. It came originally from a very high risk scenario that some clever person, I don't even know who, came up with the idea to collect it. So obviously, I just get a boob. So obviously, when we talk about colostrum collection, it means that women from about, depending which literature you look at, about 17 weeks already have dead milk in their pregnancy that will also be available to a newborn. And it's I call it the astronaut food. It's highly powerful. It's like the first vaccine for your baby. So possibly, first of all, is it worth to collect? Yes. So even if you are not intending to breastfeed, can you collect your colostrum? Absolutely. So 100% highly recommended. For me, success in colostrum collection is not about the volume. It's about that you familiarize yourself with how you do it. Because if you, for example, had your baby who's born has maybe low blood sugars, particularly with a woman who has gestational diabetes, which is very common nowadays, and somebody says to you, can you collect colostrum now? I mean, if you've just given birth and you're trying to actually do a task you've never done before, you will possibly think, whoa, what's happening here? So for me, the first and most important one is actually getting a good kind of motor skill together, you know, getting an understanding, looking at your own boobs. So being aware around how does my boob function? Where's my nipple sitting? How does it feel when I squeeze? You know, so it's really that awareness first. Collecting it, obviously you can find a lot of videos on it. My version of the videos is that if you had the boob, obviously this we call the areola. I often refer to the part that pops out, if it does pop out, as the nipple, right? But usually we say you do a bit of a C-grip. I will just go a bit further back so you can see it easier.
Just describe it too, Anne, because this is audio as well as visual.
Yeah, so you would do a C-grip going about 3 centimeters away from the part that erects on your nipple. And then what you do is you push back towards your chest. Then you compress behind the nipple, and then you roll forward and hold it for a second. You often see tiny little beads shaping, and most hospitals give you syringes. Important is if you actually buy syringes online, be aware not all of them are actually really good quality. So you can buy a lot of things out there for a lot of money, And a lot of people say this is the best set, but actually it should be oral tip syringes, and they should be for enteral use, which means enteral use means essentially that it is a higher quality syringe and not a cheap China plastic syringe. So be really specific about that. And then the hospitals nowadays give you sets. I am a big fan that the syringes should also have a cap, because it's more hygienic to be able to cap it. Once you collected it, you can store it in the fridge, and after 24 hours, you can put it into the freezer. Again, you should label it, so your name, date of birth, and the date of collection should go on it. And then when you go in, because you're welcoming your baby, what you should do is definitely take your little esky with the colostrum. And I usually say to partners, they're the guardians, so not to kind of let go of the colostrum until you see it goes in the freezer. Yeah, that's about it. Yeah.
And so that can be very, very useful when bubby lands, and people can give, and particularly if there's separation from the mother, it can be used in lieu of formula, or, you know, if the mother's not available to be able to feed the baby.
Yeah, you can use it also if you, for example, have a very sleepy baby. You can give a little bit of colostrum, and often it's as if these little people, they're like, oh, you're telling me food? Okay, I'm going for food. So often if you have a very sleepy baby, giving even, let's say, a small volume of the colostrum, because it's very easily absorbed and the blood sugar rises quite quickly, you often find a few minutes later that the babies wake up and they're like getting excited, and even if they were not interested supposedly in drinking, and then they're kind of going for it. You know? So definitely, I would say, I mean, don't make yourself too much pressure. But even if you cannot see anything coming out, continue the attempts. So be really, because ultimately in pregnancy, your pregnancy hormones, particularly the placental hormones, they inhibit the flow of more colostrum and more milk. And so once the baby's born, the placenta is born, that will actually then kickstart the sort of the hormonal evolution for breastfeeding.
So when you do express, it is drop by drop by drop. It's very slow process. And so they can express it into the syringe and freeze it, and then bring it out and put more in. Is that right? Or do they need a different container every time they express?
So I usually use a little cup or specific spoon that women can use if it's very liquidy, if it's very thick, and it can be like thick honey in winter. If you ever try to get honey out of a bottle in winter, nearly impossible. So it can be really syrupy and thick. So if it's syrupy and thick, you can quite easily collect it with a syringe. But if it's more runny, more water-like, then it's much easier to collect it on a spoon or a little cup. You know, and that is often much more efficient, and then kind of draw it up with the syringe once you collected whatever you get out. In regards to collecting into the same syringe, you can for 24 hours, but you wouldn't freeze it in between. You would just put it in the fridge in a Ziploc bag. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Beautiful. That's good detail. Thank you. And how do you know if breastfeeding's not working?
Oh, well, okay. So there's the obvious and not obvious, right? So the obvious is, speaking from my practice, if we look at what are the most common things women seek support for, right? It's often the partners who call me and they say, my partner had a baby. And you can possibly relate really well. And they say, we have this and this issue. And I would say the hit list of complications is possibly from nipple damage and pain, low supply, babies losing more than 10%, babies being very sleepy or jaundiced. Those are possibly the most common ones. Of course, you can also see things like an oversupply. You can also see things like babies not gaining weight, particularly if the babies are a bit older, that we see that sometimes there is a very slow weight gain. A lot of those symptoms have to do with latch. I mean, some symptoms like a low supply could have physical kind of factors involved that actually are attributed to the mum. So, for example, some mums might have low glandular tissue, which means that the tissue that produces the milk is actually less in them. And so it would take a lot more work to get to whatever their body is able to produce. But a lot of the difficulties I see are possibly directly related to the latch. So latch meaning how the baby attaches to the breast.
Right. Beautiful. Other things that people have got to be aware of are things like mastitis and lumps and things like that. And I know you've worked a lot with laser and things like that to help tell people a little bit about that and how to potentially, or to at least identify if it could be an issue and potentially how to avoid it.
I think prevention is best. I would say number one is possibly when you are breastfeeding. I usually say in the morning and at night at least, try to check your breasts. And that includes for me that you kind of have a look at my nipples. How do they look like? You always want to feel inside, and also say, how am I feeling? So kind of, how does it feel when I latch? How does it feel when the baby suckles? Is there something in me that tells me this doesn't feel right? So it's a lot about feeling and emotion and intuition, and that will get stronger and stronger and stronger. You're giving yourself a bit of time, but obviously checking your boobs, then also check kind of if you had the nipple, a side of the nipple, you want to also touch your boobs kind of, and usually we say just wander over your breast with kind of your fingertips as if you do a little catwalk, and try to see, can you feel any lumps, can you feel any tenderness, does it feel like a bruise, or does it feel like there's some firmer bits in there like little marbles under the skin. So you want to really get a good awareness around how your breast tissue works, and that I would say it's good to establish that habit already when you're pregnant. Possibly in the shower can be a good idea if you have a shower every day, to just kind of use a bit of the of soap, when you're kind of washing yourself, because that aids as a lubricant, and just get awareness. How do my breasts feel like, right? In regards to how women can see that there is an issue is, I would say with mastitis, the most common call type I get is that a woman says, I woke up and I thought something's not right. I felt like flu-like symptoms. Something didn't feel right. Then I checked my boob. It's very red. Or they might say I have a lump, or I might, pretty much they give me the symptoms. But I would say the first thought is always something doesn't feel right, or I feel sick. And obviously then checking your boob confirms that you might feel a discomfort or pain when you touch yourself, so I would say always check for those things first and trust that, and don't sit on it. That's possibly another important one. So if you have onset of mastitis or engorgement, which now we know, in the old days we thought there is a plaque, and then essentially the milk stagnates, the flow stagnates, and then the mastitis happens. But we do also have obviously more and more understanding that that's an inflammatory process. In Germany we have a saying that says, if you have mastitis, we often say, have you had an argument with your mum-in-law? And what that stands for, and yes, exactly right. And it's surprising how often it's actually true. And people always think I'm a psychic. I'm absolutely not a psychic. But I do believe that we are holistic beings. And it's so often that, for example, Christmas time or any holiday season, women meet families, so the babies might be asleep in family members' arms and not feed as long, or the women may feel an obligation to host or to be more present and not to withdraw in a room and feed as long, or even the travel times being long in the car, the babies sleep in the seat and they might actually not feed as frequently. So essentially it's a bit of a combination of when times come of that have a lot of change to your normal, then it's more likely that obviously from a physical training of the breast, you might have an impact. And then on the other hand, if there's times of change, let's say when you're moving house, when maybe after the first 6 to 8 weeks you had really good support and then you don't anymore. Or the first argument, yes, with your mum-in-law or with your mum or your partner, actually, to be honest, and that has an effect on you and how you feel. And then obviously if your stress hormones go up, you can imagine that your immune system is often affected, right? So I would say that's a really important one when I work with women who have particularly mastitis or engorgement a lot, that I actually say, what's going on? Tell me a bit about what's happening in your life. And then they're like, everything is fine. And then we start chatting, and before you know it, they're like, well, this week, I went to baby swimming, baby sensory, a jimbaroo. I had my mum-in-law visiting, and I had, we had the car in with the garage, and we had this and this and this, and then they're like, oh, actually, this week has been a busy week.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, so I would say remember that as a woman, remember that we are very beautiful, complex individuals, and we respond not just to the physical side of things.
And in those early days when you're establishing breastfeeding, keeping things low key is so important, because particularly if, we've got the personality type where we're on the go, and then we have these babies and we don't appreciate what's got to happen on the other side. Not only are you recovering from birth and your hormones are going back to a pre-pregnant state, but you're turning into a lactating mother, and that's a whole other physiological response. So your body's under a lot to create the milk. I always laugh about pregnancy hunger is nothing compared to lactation hunger. That's a whole other level of hunger. And so your ability to eat when you're hungry, your ability to rest while your baby's sleeping and during the day, and to not be overwhelmed by people around you, all of that is going to impact your breastfeeding. Did you want to say something yet? Yep.
Yeah, sure. I think what comes to my mind is that sometimes the outside busyness, is something that we have to wean off. So if women are particularly professional and they work full time and they have very high profile jobs or very busy jobs, and they're so used to kind of tick off a list from 0 to 100 every day, right? Their perception of what achievement means is altered. It's just altered. They kind of have a high expectation. They think, well, I'm getting up in the morning and I'm jumping into the shower and I already have started the washing machine. The dishwasher is already, unpacked. I've packed my lunch. I made a smoothie. Or on the way, I should actually go to the gym. Then I go to work and I'm already on fire, right? And then they have a baby and they're like, well, today I managed to feed the baby, change the baby. And
didn't get a shower. Your hair hasn't been done. You're still in your pajamas, and that's really normal. In fact, I think it's the layout of the landscape now. It's not about achieving; it's about being, and it's in that state of being that you're able to attune and to read your baby. If you're continually on the go, you're not going to be able to read your baby's cues.
Yeah, well, it's even to have that awareness. So even if your mind is not able to tick enough boxes for the day, your body every microsecond is busy doing something. It's healing from birth. It replenishes blood. It kind of has hormonal changes going on. It's producing milk. It's like doing hundreds and thousands of things every microsecond. So your body is ticking off a lot of boxes. Emotionally, your subconscious is ticking a lot of boxes. Just our cognitive mind is so busy searching for validation and how much we have achieved in a day. So if we can just remember, even if you think you're not doing anything all day, your body is actually doing a lot of things.
Yeah, and your subconscious is paying a lot of attention to absorbing information about what that baby's communicating to you. Now, one of the things I've been always aware of, Anne, with breastfeeding is the role and the importance of partners in that space. They say that the biggest contributor to successful breastfeeding is the partner. And it's really so important, if she's struggling, to be surrounded by people who are not giving her opinions about, just put the baby on the bottle. If she needs to make that decision, that's got to come from her. She doesn't need influence from other people telling her that she's failing. The implicit message underneath is that she's failing. So tell us what you think, Anne, partners can do to support a woman to get over those humps.
First of all, educate themselves as well, and be in awe what women can do, and don't presume that she's done until she tells you she's done. Again, what you said, don't imply your belief systems onto her. Absolutely not. That's possibly the most difficult one. Also self-awareness for partners. I think often if we understand, again, you're really educated around love languages, and you talk a lot about that, Tracy. But to understand that often for partners, care equates fixing a problem, but birth or breastfeeding doesn't need to be fixed by the partners, So being open and non-judgmental, asking questions rather than solutions, saying, what do you need? And that can quite often just mean, I just need you to be with me. I don't need you to kind of say we need to use a bottle, because many women in country, they often feel that's even worse, because then they feel even more judged, and they feel that that they can't do it. So I would say being open and educated, and particularly in the classes, it's the number one question asked by partners, because I always say, what would you like to get out of the class is how can we introduce a bottle? And once we finish the class, it's quite often that the partners say, well, that doesn't make sense, does it, Anne? And I'm like, no, it doesn't make sense. But I understand why they want to suggest it. It's often that idea they can give their beloved ones more sleep or more rest. But once they understand the concept that it doesn't work like that, it becomes quite clear they can be practically supportive, making sure that, bringing drinks like that, your partner's hydrated, gets enough food, rest, and possibly guard the place, really be the rock, in the ocean when... Yeah, the gatekeeper. It's so super important for breastfeeding, because we forget that the hormones involved in breastfeeding, there's a lot of oxytocin and all the attachment going on. And it is so important. If a woman knows her partner has her back, she will actually attach better with her baby. And if her partner supports the choices she makes about feeding, and that's regardless of which choice, right? So it's not just about whether it's breastfeeding or not. This woman will feel more supported. She will attach easier with her baby, and that is a direct effect on your relationship later. And that's kind of the best investment in your relationship, if you are supportive about those choices.
Yeah, beautiful. Well said. Absolutely. Well, there's a lot to take in. I think we'll bring this to a close, but I think Anne's messaging today has been powerful in that she's highlighted that breastfeeding is not just a physical challenge, it is a multi-layered psychosocial challenge as well, that we've got to be mindful of the expert culture and getting the right information at the right time. And I would always suggest people go looking for a lactation consultant above and beyond say midwives or other health professionals who might give you opinions about things, because they're trained to overcome challenges. She's given you some great ideas about how to identify if it's not working, and some really good stuff on expressing as well, and the role of the partner. So that's a lot of really good stuff. You can contact Anne. How can they contact you, Anne, if they want a little bit of extra support or to do any of your online offerings?
Yeah. So I'm essentially on all the socials under Evolve Midwifery Services, and you can also go on my website, which is www.evolvemidwiferyservices.com.au. There's a contact form, and I offer obviously services face-to-face as well as telehealth. I do a lot of expats and, internationally, and wherever somebody is, we can find a solution. But if I really believe it's better for somebody to see somebody face to face, I will also try to help to find a more suitable kind of solution for them.
Beautiful. Thank you. And thanks everybody for listening, and we will see you again next week. Thanks for tuning in. Bye for now. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe and share this podcast. This episode has been brought to you by Transform Parenting, an organisation that provides courses, coaching and community from pregnancy through to the first 7 years of a child's life. It is a place where you can learn, get support and grow into your role as a parent. Why not take advantage of a special gift for all pregnant women at transformyourbirth.com.au? Or if you have children, we have a gift for parents also.